I had just moved to Vermont for work, an IT contract that promised quiet nights and a fresh start. I found a small rental house on the edge of town, nestled deep in the woods. The locals called it the house at Raven Creek. No one really talked about it, but if you asked the right people, they'd give you a nod, a tight-lipped smile. And then, silence. When I first saw it, I thought it was charming. Old, creaky, but charming. It had peeling paint, a crooked porch, and those massive trees that made the house seem smaller than it was. But as I walked up the steps, I noticed the smell. Not mold, not decay, something else, something cold. The first night was strange. Nothing overt, nothing I could point to. Just the feeling that I wasn't alone. I set up my laptop, ready to work late, and that's when I noticed the tapping. Light, rhythmic, coming from upstairs. My first thought was a tree branch hitting the window. But the sound moved, from the ceiling, to the floorboards, and then, to the wall behind me. I laughed nervously. It's just an old house, I muttered to myself. But I couldn't shake it. That tapping, it had a pattern, almost like someone was counting. The next day, I explored the house properly. The realtor had said charming, classic, untouched, but there were rooms I hadn't seen yet. A small door in the back of the closet. I didn't even know closets had doors like that. It led to a crawl space, dust thick enough to choke, and a box. Just an old wooden box, unmarked, locked. Inside, letters. Hundreds of letters, all from the same person, all addressed to Eleanor. Dated, over 50 years ago. Most of the letters were mundane at first. Love letters? But the last few, they were different, obsessive, desperate. Mentions of watching her sleep, she cannot leave, and something about the third night. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the tapping. Louder now, from the walls, the floor, everywhere. I ran to the window. No one there, just the trees swaying, the creek, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I stayed awake the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I saw a shadow in the corner, just waiting. The next morning, I went into town. I asked about the house. Most people clammed up, but an old man in the diner leaned close and whispered, "They say Eleanor never left." Not really. People disappear in that house. Whole families. They don't just vanish. The house, it keeps them. I laughed, nervously. "You're joking, right?" He didn't smile. He just said, "Check the letters. You'll see." I returned home, heart pounding. The letters. They weren't just from some obsessed lover. They were from multiple people, spanning decades. All talking about Eleanor, about keeping her inside, about feeding her. That night, the tapping was louder, louder than ever, and then came the whispering. "Eleanor, come to us." I froze. My blood ran cold. That's when I realized the sound wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from under the house. I found the hatch. It was hidden under the rug in the living room. I hesitated. My rational brain screamed to leave, but curiosity and terror pushed me forward. I climbed down into the basement. The air was thick. I could barely see, but then I noticed markings. Hundreds of scratches on the walls, names, dates, faces, carved into the wood, and in the center, a small figure huddled in the shadows. "Eleanor?" I whispered. She looked up, eyes hollow, skin pale as death. And then she spoke, but not with words I could understand, just a sound that pierced straight through my mind. I ran, out of the house, into the cold night. I didn't stop until I reached the diner. The old man just nodded. "They're always watching," he said. "And now, you've seen her. They'll want you back." I left the next day, sold all my belongings. I don't know what I expected, maybe closure, but I can't shake it. Leaving that house didn't end anything. If anything, it made things worse. Distance didn't bring relief. The tapping still came. Not from the walls anymore, but from inside my head. So I did the only thing that made sense to me. I started researching the house, old town archives, property records, hospital files, newspaper clippings that had yellowed with age. I followed every thread I could find, and what I discovered shook the ground beneath my feet. Eleanor wasn't a myth. She wasn't a name invented by the house. She was real. Decades ago, the house at Raven Creek belonged to a wealthy family. Eleanor was their only child, beautiful, quiet, and painfully shy. People remembered her as polite, always holding her mother's hand. Her father died when she was still very young. The record said natural causes. But after that, the house changed. When Eleanor was 11 years old, her mother was involved in a serious car accident. She survived, but fell into a coma she never truly woke from. From that moment on, Eleanor was alone. To care for Eleanor and her comatose mother, her uncle and aunt moved into the house. On paper, they were listed as guardians, family, protectors. In reality, they were none of those things. Witness statements, collected years later, spoke of screaming at night, of Eleanor disappearing from school, of a little girl seen standing at windows, unmoving, watching. The abuse wasn't sudden. It was slow, systematic, mental cruelty, physical punishment, isolation. Eleanor learned very early that adults were not safe, and the house became the only place that knew everything. Years later, the uncle and aunt left town without warning. No forwarding address, no explanation. Soon after, Eleanor and her mother were officially declared missing. There were no bodies, no funerals, no answers. The case was quietly closed, but the house remained. The house at Raven Creek is not haunted. There are no curses, no evil walls, no malevolent force lurking in the dark. What remains there is her spirit never left. Not because the house trapped her, but because she didn't know how to leave. She died seeing the world as a place filled with monsters wearing human faces. And she is still that 11-year-old child. When someone new enters the house, Eleanor doesn't see an adult. She sees her uncle, her aunt, figures who smile during the day and hurt her in the dark. So she watches, she hides, she counts. The tapping isn't a threat. It's a habit she formed while waiting, counting seconds, counting nights, counting until it was over. People don't vanish because the house wants them. They vanish because Eleanor is afraid. She believes she's protecting herself. Anyone who stays too long, who ignores the signs, who doesn't leave when they should, becomes part of her fear. Not victims of a haunted house, but victims of a terrified child who never learned what safety was. And now, I understand why she was watching me. I understand why she stood in the corner of my room. She wasn't hunting. She was judging, trying to decide whether I was like them. And maybe, one day, she'll decide I am. Because Eleanor is still there, still 11, still counting, still waiting.